first reading for our Spring 2022 Georgia College Creative Writing Program Visiting Writers Series. It gives me great pleasure to welcome poet Allison Joseph to Georgia College and to our virtual event space. Thank you to Georgia College and the Department of English for supporting this series. Before Allison is introduced by Georgia College MFA student Natalie Mao, two of our MFA students in poetry will be sharing their work with us this evening, Natalie Mao and Avery James. And first up will be Natalie Mao. Natalie is a second-year poetry student at Georgia College. Her work can be found in journals such as Denver Quarterly and Button Eye Review. When she is not writing, she is completing one of many DIY projects on her to-do list, walking her dog, or tending to her garden. And without further ado, Natalie Mao.
Thank you, Carrie, for that. It's great to see everyone, and I can't thank y'all enough for tuning in tonight's reading. I know it's going to be a really good one, as I am sharing the stage with some wonderful poets, Allison and Avery. So thank you guys for the opportunity and for tuning in. I have a few short poems to share with you guys this evening, which I hope you'll enjoy. This first one that I'm going to read tonight is titled A Bowl of Cherries. This poem was inspired by Kitchen McCowan's poem Outbreaks, which I have not been able to stop reading since I discovered it a while back. So I would definitely encourage you guys to look it up after tonight's reading and enjoy it with me. They're a wonderful poet and just came out or about to come out with a new chapbook. So go and support them and, you know, go do that. But this is A Bowl of Cherries. I search for God, but come up empty. My cup cannot be filled. The house won't stay warm. Cracks decorate the window's corners. A stink bug waddles across the wall, small, unwelcome jester. The cat watches, tail flicking like a flame, but he does not move. I search for God between the couch cushions, but find only a quarter, some sand, the torn edge of a love letter I once wrote her. Unreadable, but still true. The stink bug perches on the mantle. The cat sizes up the jump, but decides against it. I decide, God is not here today. They must be hiding in a bowl of cherries that sits, untouched, on someone else's kitchen counter. The stink bug lifts one little leg and takes flight. The cat and I watch, tracing the air, trying to make out the shape my love's absence takes as the stink bug disappears behind her favorite chair. Thank you. So this next one I'm going to read, a lot of y'all might already know this about me, considering that our program is really small and I talk a lot, but I really love birds, like a ton. And I find a lot of inspiration in birds. I've kept them for a while. And I just think they're fun and full of personality. And this next poem is written about the last time an OO bird was ever seen in the 1980s. And it's called, appropriately, the OO's Last Song. In 1987, a male Kauai OO, the last living member of the Mahoide family of birds, was filmed calling out for a mate. The Kauai OO, like many of the Mahoide family, were believed to mate for life. Every species within the Mahoide family is now extinct. From his home, carved in the side of the canyon, the OO hears the forest humming. Shiny black beetles scrape against rock and root. The Ojai, Luea, yawn awake in dappled sun. High in the canopy, everything whistles and sings. The OO waits for a familiar song. He does not know it will never come, that he is the last, soon to be a memory. When he finally sings, his song bounces through branches, tumbles into the canyon, it echoes, and the oh-oh waits, listening for his mate's sweet reply. The beetles drag their hard black bellies over wet rock. The Ojai Loea shrug as the sun begins to fade. The oh-oh calls out again as the light dips below the canyon wall. He settles into his nest, wings pressed tight against his sides, still listening for an answer. And for my last poem of the night, I'm going to read one that I've titled Wedding Prep. This is a poem that has been recently nominated for the AWP Intro Journal Prize, for which I'm very grateful and super humbled by. So I'm excited to share this with y'all. And like I said, this one is called Wedding Prep. Wedding Prep. I am digging a trench at the base of a Chilean mesquite tree with my wife's ex-boyfriend's dad, John, scanning the hard orange earth for fire ants when I feel something that feels like joy. Maybe it's the heat or the time difference or the state of the world, but I am clawing into the scorched earth with a dented spade and welding gloves while my wife drinks her third mimosa of the day with the rest of the wedding party and cries about God knows what in a Pepto-Bismol pink bridesmaid's dress with her ex-boyfriend behind a locked bedroom door. And I feel good. John tells me about the tree. The bark is dark red and waxy, always anticipating fire. The roots are shallow, so I must be careful about where I am digging. I dig and scrape and let dust coat my forearms because the winds from earlier in the afternoon have died down, and now it's just me and the sun. I don't mind the burn. I've never minded pain as long as it's honest. I focus on my gloved hands, how good they feel in the dirt. My fingers trace the scar. I am cutting it across the yard as John strings lights in the tree's canopy. John says the neighbors lost a tree recently because of too much rain. Losing a tree out here, he says, is devastating. Shade is a luxury. I tell him that the trees back home can't ever get enough to drink. He tells me there can be too much of a good thing. Thank y'all for listening to me tonight. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Natalie. Those are beautiful poems. Next up is Avery James. Avery James is a third-year MFA student at Georgia College and State University with a concentration in poetry. Her experience here has encouraged her to continuously find ways to integrate her passion for service with art. As a staunch advocate for marginalized populations, she is always looking for chances to return to the communities that have fostered her into the person she is and hopes to become. Things she can't stop talking and writing about are mythology, activism, video game essays, cats, even though she is painfully allergic, and her exasperation with Jeff Bezos. Give you Natalie, Avery James.
Thank you very much for that introduction. And what a wonderful reading. I'm just so glad to be sharing the space with such wonderful poets. All right, so let's get into it. So the first poem I'm going to begin with is based after a Russian Orthodox saint named Saint Olga of Kiev. And if you haven't looked her up, you most certainly should. Phenomenal woman. I don't know how she got away with so much and became a saint, but here we go. Saint Olga reaches the city of thoughts and prayers. And just outside the wall, she waits for emissaries to emerge, to meet her on this field wide enough to steal a man's vision. Her late husband's army stands with her, a wall of grieving towers. The snowfall turns them hard and blue. The sun, creeping over the bluffs, refuses to warm them. The city observes their waiting. Its many ears turn to the field, half hoping the cold will tire them and send them away. The men who appear are old, dripping with velvets, bear furs, and beards that shine with precious, flammable oils. She can tell by the way they cruise through the air. They expect her to call off the war. And of course, before the men move to bargains, they begin with thoughts and prayers. If only we all had 2 lives on this earth so that we might learn from the death of the first. If only God had made this world a moneyless world. If only your husband had listened to us. Then they ask her, what will it take to end the bloodshed between us? She says to them, face so hard and blue it barely shifts, tell every house inside your city to give me their favorite homing sparrow. Then and only then will we clean our shields in the snow and sail home. By evening, the emissaries send out warship crates full of cooing and gray wings. Olga's answer takes the whole night. She has her husband's men tuck bars of sulfur beneath each wing of each soft messenger. And when that work is done, she whispers her rage into their breasts. One by one, the heat of her words ignites them. She sends those burning birds back to their masters. She and her husband's men watch the sparrows disappear behind the city walls in precious arcs. Her eyes are wet, her cheeks are blue. She pictures the emissaries now, past the high wall, past the stables, past the warehouses where they store their thoughts and prayers in barrels for export, alongside the ale. They are sitting in dry houses with children, wives, children who will one day be wives, tender. Some are already sleeping, dreaming of the frozen field and the poor widow beyond the wall. Others, by chance, are squinting out their windows at the feathered comets flying home in search of water and inefficient hands. She waits for the emissaries to emerge. Thank you. And this next one is it's become a bit of an anchor piece in my thesis. And I really feel like this poem was a moment where I realized, oh, this is what this is all about. This is the click that I've been working on for 3 years. So here is Creation Myth. Creation Myth. To end your aloneness, you walk to a lip of broken earth, one flushed with river or simple darkness, and call to what lives on the other side. Perhaps you earn an answer. Perhaps that unmet mystery is more heroic than you, is first to offer their name. Either way, a voice touches an ear or firmaments the air, and you are both newly known. And so you begin, on either side, structure a body from the oak and stone which divides you. Maintain its integrity by lacing your rope with each exchange. Adhere the earth parts with wonder. How clear is their echoless voice? What color are their eyes in the golden hour? Will this bridge survive our crossing? Will it exist beyond us? Never look down at your own construction. The magic dies that way. Look instead to the other side. See your partner's work growing towards you, like the love of a child who knows only love. From this vantage, see what you are too close to notice in your own creation. The bridge is made of another element, the oldest question, the oldest starvation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Avery. Wonderful poems. Now we turn it back over to Natalie Mao, who will be introducing Allison Joseph.
Thank you. And like I said earlier, it's a joy to be reading with such lovely and talented poets. And I'm very excited for our guest of honor tonight. So I'll try not to go too long with introductions here, but she's definitely deserving of a wonderful introduction. So I hope I do it justice. I know we're all excited to have Allison Joseph here tonight and for her to share her writing with us. Whether this is your first time experiencing her work or you're a longtime admirer of hers, I'm certain that you're in for a special treat. I want to thank you, Allison, on behalf of Georgia College and the English department for setting aside some time to spend with us tonight. It's a great honor and very appreciated. Poetry, writing during this time and always are such a comfort and such a lovely thing to be doing with our evenings. So we appreciate it. For those of you who aren't super familiar with Allison Joseph and her work, Allison was born in London, but she grew up in Toronto in the Bronx. She holds a BA from Kenyon College and an MFA from Indiana University, Bloomington. And she is the current director of Southern Illinois University's MFA in Creative Writing program, as well as being one of the founding editors of the Crab Orchard Review. She's published several books and chapbooks, such as What Keeps Us Here, The Purpose of Hands, and Worldly Pleasures, to name just a few. Her latest full-length book, Confessions of a Barefaced Woman, published by Redhead Press in 2018, received the first place poetry prize in the 2019 Feathered Quill Book Award. It was also nominated for the 2019 NAACP Image Award. It was a finalist in both the Montaigne Medal and the Da Vinci Eye Book Award. I had the privilege of sitting in on a class discussion with Allison last night, and after hearing the ways in which she was talking about poetry and form and just being human and vulnerable and expressing that in our work, I know everyone here is about to hear some wonderful poems. So without further ado, I would want to introduce you guys to Allison Joseph.
Hello, everyone. It's so amazing to be at least virtually back at Georgia College and State University. Many years ago, Marty Lamon, who's on this Zoom call, I see you, Marty, treated me like a queen when I came to visit Milledgeville. I still remember that. I was on the Georgia Poetry Circuit. Milledgeville was one of the best stops. Sure beat that little Christian college in the middle of nowhere. So this afternoon, I am going to read from my work, but I'm also going to read a few poems, and this has been my new tradition, a few poems by my late husband, John Tribble. Those of you who knew John knew that he was a force of quiet nature, and our relationship started way back when we met at the MFA program at Indiana University, and the relationship continues. One thing I've come to realize, even though my sorrow at losing my life partner has been immense, that your relationship doesn't necessarily die when someone leaves this realm of existence. Your relationship becomes something different. And I have an advantage over a lot of people who have lost their partners in that my partner was a poet. So in order to summon him, all I have to do is pick up one of his books. And this is one of his books. It is his second book, and There Is Many a Good Thing, which was published by Salmon Poetry. And I've made a habit of reading this particular poem because even though my husband passed before the pandemic beset us, there's something about this particular poem and its repetitions that speaks to the last couple of years, really does. It's called Then, Now, and Later. The life you lead is not the one you planned. The unexpected twists have only grown. Your destination changes as you go. So let the disappointment you feel show. No pains or sorrows need be met alone. The life you lead is not the one you planned. You'll be surprised when someone's outstretched hand will reach for you. Others can see and know the unexpected twists have only grown. The future's less a promise, more alone, against the time you find your own command. Your destination changes as you go. Hold on to what you can. Let the rest flow, like water slips to nothing in dry sand. The unexpected twists have only grown. The life you lead is not the one you planned. There is no roadmap for this shifting land. Love, hope, and loss can never be controlled. Your destination changes as you go. I'll be reading from this poem, from this book at our closing. This is John's first book, Natural State, which is having its anniversary this week. It was published this week in 2016. But I'm going to read from the follow-up book to Confessions of a Barefaced Woman, which is this lovely book, Lexicon, which was also published by Red Hen. And if you can see, they took their inspiration for the cover design from my face. This next poem This book is about language, but it's also about grief and grieving. And it was written before John passed. So the person I'm grieving most often in these poems is my mother. My mother was an immigrant to the United States and an immigrant to Canada and an immigrant to the United Kingdom. She was born in Jamaica and came to the United Kingdom as part of what's known as the Windrush generation. Folks from the Caribbean who came to the UK post World War II to help with the economy. My parents then moved. They had my sister, had me, then they moved to Toronto. And then we moved from Toronto to the United States. So I do consider the Bronx, New York, my hometown, but that's another thing. The older you get, the more towns you accumulate. So this is a poem, and I've come to call this kind of poem an ars lacrimosa, because it's a kind of an elegy, but it's also about how grief feels somatically, how grief feels to our bodies. And I was talking in the craft talk about poems of complaint. This is called Grief, a complaint. I'm filing a complaint with you, grief. Grief, a complaint. I hate its dirty work, messy with tears, sweat, mucus, eye crust. Hate that dry, tight feeling your chest gets while you sob. Hate the morning after hangover, headache, after sobbing's ceased. Face aching, scalp tight. I hate the scent of flowers in a dusty funeral home. Hate the dithering over what to wear. Black skirt, black dress, black pants. I hate chit chat, forced smiles turning up your mouth's corners as if you are happy, as if all the hugging and handshaking and back patting will do anyone any good. I hate the concerned relatives who deign to offer comfort, the family friends who want to know what you'll do with the house, cars, silver, furniture, never once asking how you'll pay the bills, parking tickets, back taxes. I hate the bitter commerce of funerals and cemeteries, rituals of burials, and rites of remembrance that I want to forget as soon as they are over. Casket lowered slowly into its trench, my heels sinking into the just turned mud of recent departures. Looking back on that poem, I can see what I did differently when I sent John from this world to whatever world exists. I said, nobody wear black. Blue was my husband's favorite color, so you got to wear blue. And I had a chocolate chip cookie bar. That was the refreshment. I said, everybody wear blue and bring chocolate chips, because my husband loved a good chocolate chip cookie, even though he was a diabetic, and I told him not to eat the cookie. And then I'd say, okay, eat the cookie. And there's also the phenomenon of having lost one's mother. No matter how old you are, no matter when it happens to you, I lost my mother relatively young. I was in college. I am now older than she was when she passed from this world. And there's something, I think there's, no matter what kind of relationship you had with your mother, whether it was good or bad or complicated, there's still a hold a mother has on her children, at least to my experience. So this is called Dead Mothers. They don't let go of us because they're dead, nor can we let them go. All they have is us, our hazy minds, our memories revising how they spoke and walked, what they wore, who they'd nag, ignore. All they have is what we knew of them, what they wore, who they'd nag, ignore. We fail them every day that we're alive, revising how they spoke and walked us across the street, the finger's grip, the palm, the cautionary voice of no and stop that tugged us back and out of traffic's harm. Revising how they spoke and walked, we get their gestures wrong. The fault in us is us, our hazy minds, our memories, our mouths misquoting them. What's left is us, our hazy minds, our memories, our hands that cannot recreate their hands, nor can we let them go. All we have, bound up with how they left and why, and where they breathed their last, hospital or desk or twisted car. Nor can we let them go. All they have and were remains in us, transformed or not. They don't let go of us because they're dead. This next poem is, we were talking in Carrie's class about repetition and why poets are so very much drawn to poems that have some element of repetition. And I have found in my own work that poems that repeat are often the poetic forms that repeat are often the poems that get to the heart of what I'm trying to say. So the irony is, by repeating myself, I get to the true nugget or kernel of truth that I want to say. And I grew up in a household that at times was violent. And I had tried really hard to write about it. This poem is a rondo, which we just looked at in my class, just came from teaching my class, literally took my mask off. So this is a rondo called Her Want, and the her in the poem is my mother. Her want. What did my mother want to be? Wife to a man who'd randomly strike out at her then kiss her face? Did she retreat to her mind's space when he would yell, then laugh in glee? What did she think of history? What painful visions did she flee when cancer took her to a wretched place? What did my mother want? Her hopes and thoughts, a mystery I'm left with only pieces of. I see her rise in memory, embrace what's left each bit and trace. I'd wanted her to stay for me. What did my mother want? So everyone here on this Zoom call has had the wretched situation of asking someone for a recommendation. If you are in grad school, undergraduate school, if you're a professor, all of us have had that terrible, terrible task of asking people for recommendations. And the way recommendations are set up these days, you can't just write, yes, hire her. It would be honest, much more honest, if we had recommendation forms that were just like those old notes that we used to pass when we were as kids in school. Do you like me? Check yes or no. If recommendation letters were like that, then we'd all be fine. And I love using the Pantone form to make fun of things. So if you've had to write recommendation letters, I think you'll dig this poem because it makes fun, through its repetitions, makes fun of the phrases that we use all the time. It's called Recommendation Letter. I'm writing on behalf of someone else. I knew him in a life that's years ago. He's just the one you want to hire. Please give his application full attention. I knew him in a life that's years ago, and everything about him is faded now. Please give his application full attention, because I tell you to, because I wrote this down, and everything about him is faded now, except the fact that he needs a job, needs to eat. Because I tell you to, because I wrote this down, please look over his stats, his credits, his bio, the fact that he needs this job, needs to eat. He's well trained in his field, his work. Please look over his stats, his credits, his bio, and choose him from the throng. Touch him. He's well trained in his field, his work, though I can't recall his face right now. Choose him from the throng. Touch him with life insurance, benefits, union dues. Though I can't recall his face right now, he's just the one you want to hire with life insurance, benefits, union dues. I'm writing on behalf of someone else. So this being Black History Month, I wanted to read a poem this evening that gives a little bit of insight into what it feels like to be a Black poet, just not the Black poet that everyone wants to see. This is called Mistaken Identity. The day I became Rita Dove in a bathroom in a library in Harrison, Arkansas, a little old lady tottered up to me while I was washing my hands to ask if I was the poet laureate she'd read about during the library's 8-week Poets in Person series. I wanted to say yes, had to say no, told the tiny woman with the fluttery hands and the parchment skin that I hoped one day to be as good as Rita Dove. And that, yes, I was a poet, live and in person in her local library. Just not that poet, just not that famous. That day, no men in white robes stood in the center of town in Harrison, Arkansas, to declare their hatred of all things wretched and black. That day, no rally made the evening news with slogans and fists and wizards. That day, one small white woman, trembling with age and astonishment, stood in awe of one Black woman, even if I wasn't quite the poet she wanted. I can't fault her for wanting to find a poet in the bathroom of the library in Harrison, Arkansas. Can only thank her for having the sublime taste to mistake me for someone more famous and more talented when, if I'd showed up on the wrong day in Harrison, Arkansas, I'd be tree bait. And no poem or prayer could have helped me then, saved me from the immaculate white men and their history in Harrison, in Arkansas. I was, speaking of poetry and poet laureates, I was top 3 for the poet laureateship of Illinois. And I really wanted to be the next poet laureate of Illinois. I wasn't chosen. The current poet laureate is a fine poet out of Chicago named Angela Jackson. But at the time, I really thought it would just make my life complete. Now I realize that no one really cares except other poets. So this is a poem called Laureate, and it's a sonnet. Laureate. He might say something wise enough to print. She might make poetry more popular than shin splints or those globs of pocket lint inside your washed out jeans. He might just bore assemblies of the 1st or 7th grades. She might disrobe and leave us all in shock. He might not want to be here, but you paid for all his expertise, his wit, his stock responses to the questions asked each time. Why write? Why poetry? Why not real books? Can what you've read be poetry sans rhyme? She might be thinking of her faded looks, her sad visage poetic, but not for words. He might be drunk right now, all vision blurred. So I'm going to read some poems from a forthcoming chapbook that is going to be published very soon by Kelsey Books. And just a few poems from that. It's on my screen, which is why my face went up. So in my class that I just taught before coming to join this Zoom call, we were looking at the Rondo, and we looked at the 2 famous examples, one of them being Paul Laurence Dunbar's poem, We Wear the Mask. It's a poem that haunts me every time I look at those 15 lines. I feel something different. I feel that the poem is still incredibly relevant, strangely so. And often when a poem gets gets in me, I write a response poem. And I know that I was thinking of Paul Laurence Dunbar's poem when I wrote this poem, and I know I was thinking of an incident of racialized violence that happened in our country. The sad thing is I can't remember which one provoked this poem because there have been so many. That's the sad thing. So this is called Compliance. It's after Paul Laurence Dunbar, and it's also in the rondo form. We wore the mask, but we are broken still. Broken bodies drained of joy and skill. The evidence denied, argued away. The violence enacted, on display for anyone to share or like for thrills. So many broken bodies stripped of will. So many useless arguments until another incident, then more replays. We wore the mask, tried to comply with rules, and still were spilled. Our blood a simple fetish. Those who kill will kill again, no matter how we pray, no matter how we issue our dismay. The lust for blood is sport. To die is play. We wore the mask. This is another poem. Oh, I should have read that in class. One of my students is here. Hi, Rachel. I should have read that in class. I should have. You're right. I should have read that in class. So a couple more poems, and then we can move on to Q&A. So this next poem is all about, I think, what we're all going through right now, which is in the wake of the last few years of human existence on this planet, just getting out of bed some days is a major accomplishment. Like snaps to me, I got out of bed. I had a conversation with someone other than my cat. I don't actually have a cat, but you know what I mean. So this is a how are you coping poem, and it's called After Surfacing. So how are you coping with all that's gone wrong? Indulging and doping, or crafting a song? With all that's gone wrong, why fight for what's right? Indulging and hoping these wrecks will be slight. Why fight for what's right? Why bother at all? These wrecks will be slight, surviving the fall. Why bother at all? Why wake up and rise? Surviving the fall means hearing those lies. Why wake up and rise? World slaps you back down, and hearing their lies, you know you're not sound. World slaps you back down when you're on your feet. You know you're not sound and feel each defeat. When you're on your feet and flailing about, you feel each defeat and each stinging doubt. And flailing about, you feel where you break. With each stinging doubt, you harness each ache. You feel where you break, indulging and hoping. You harness each ache, each lesson in coping. For me, that's been the pattern of the pandemic, like feeling that I'm being incredibly indulgent and hoping for breakthroughs and trying to harness my pain and learn from it and learn lessons from the way I'm moving through the world and coping. So Carrie knows this about me. Both Carries know that I run a lot. I'm a runner and a walker, and one of the ways I've tried to survive this period is to just get out there. So anyone who who uses their body, you know, you wear parts down. And right now my toes are looking really bad, but I had to write a love poem to my toes anyway. So this is a love poem in the form of an apology to my toes. And this is an assignment you can do endlessly because we all have parts of our bodies that are breaking down, and we usually don't show them enough love. So this is called Apologia to My Toes. Who am I to ask this much of you? Blisters and broken toenails, bruises I savor as signal of daring stamina. Forgive me the hours and miles on my feet, blood trapped under skin, calluses gone stony, rough and hardly beautiful as I hide you in socks, stained from the cuts I let accumulate like a child counting marbles. You must think I despise you the way I lace you into sneakers, trap you in strappy sandals, hide you in winter boots as soon as fall leaves drop. No beach for you, my bashed digits, my burdened servants. How you suffer for my folly, how you grow old and wizened with all my demanding steps. And what do you ever get for your loyalty and service? A hasty rub, no better than what a dog gets. One day, I know you'll revolt, grounding me until I pay attention, baby you with lotions and new insoles, a pedicure, a paint job. That day you'll make me sorrier than all my lusty wandering ever made you, and I will cry for mercy, for tenderness, elevating my legs so that finally you'll be above all else. This next poem is specifically for the writers in the audience. And we all think about ways we can get away from our everyday lives, and we go off to conferences and colonies. And I was thinking when I wrote this, well, purgatory wouldn't be that bad. So it's called, instead of a writer's colony, instead of a writer's colony, I'm thinking purgatory is not that bad. If I get left alone to write and think, my quietude descending via ink, my search for peace insistent, no mere fad that I'll soon tire of. I won't feel sad to stumble on the edge, live on the brink between what's right and wrong, not sink into despair. This vacuum makes me glad, this emptiness a respite from my fears, an echo chamber blanked of all I love, platoon of vacant passages and rooms, a way station of decades, minutes, years. If heaven stays unreachable above, then purgatory is where I'll live and bloom. So one more poem of mine, and then I'll read one more poem of John's, and then we can do a Q&A. And again, I want to thank the faculty so much, the double carries, so much love to all of you for making me part of your week. I wish so much that I could be there, but we made the decision pretty early on to have me do this virtually. I'm missing the meals though. I remember when I visited with Marty, we had some epic meals. In the craft talk, I talked about the ode and how when you are feeling you have nothing to write about and your imaginative powers are empty, writing just a poem that praises something simple is a really wonderful thing. Praises something familiar. So one of my favorite things is earplugs. The little ones that you can put in your ears and then the world just goes away. And I travel by train a lot. So I try to always have earplugs on me. Ode to earplugs. How glorious it is not to hear the labile screaming baby in the crowded train car. The vicious bickering of that couple behind him. Bliss not to hear the unrelenting explosions erupting from the movie on some schoolboy's laptop. Nurturing silence while while a gum-chewing teen mom blathers into her cell phone about some dude named Tyrone who has owed her money for 15 months, back child support she'll never see, since Tyrone or Floyd or Daryl or whatever his name is has long since moved out of state, out of town, out of cell phone range. I do not hear these things because of your round, soft, yielding grace. You obliterate decibels like killing invaders, leave me headache-free and unremittingly pleasant. Oh, you are awesome indeed, amazing as you block the madness that makes me hate humankind. With you, softly couched in my ears, plugged in just so I can smile at that yowling baby, admire the flush of his red cheeks. I can admire the movie's cinematography, silent as another apocalypse is averted in another superhero movie. I can smile, offer a fresh piece of gum to the teen mom, give her a tissue to wipe her daughter's snotty nose. And as for that couple, tattered and blistered and talking rough, it is enough to know we'll never be them. That when I squeeze earplugs in next, when I squeeze, then slip earplugs in next to my love at night, all I'm fending off is the sound of his errant snoring, rumblings forced upon him to keep him alive. Speaking of that love, I'm going to close with a poem of John's from his book, Natural State. And I made him write this poem. John was very good at getting other people in print, whether it was through Crab Orchard Review or through the Crab Orchard series in poetry. But he had this feeling that he should sacrifice his own art for other people's. And I didn't believe that. I wanted him to write. So I nagged. So the story behind this particular poem was John was originally from Little Rock, Arkansas. And we taught for a couple of years at the university there, University of Arkansas, Little Rock, UALR, home to the Trojans. And if you know Little Rock, the campus for the university isn't downtown, although they've opened up a separate, smaller downtown branch. It's sort of midtown in the middle of the city. So you have a fairly small, condensed campus, as many urban campuses are. And then you have the rest of the city that's sort of up against it. And I remember one of the back alley entranceways off of campus, there was a sort of strip mall area. And in the strip mall, if I remember correctly, there was a storefront church, a meat/fish market, and a gentleman's club. Those of you from the South know what gentleman's club is a euphemism for. It was a strip joint. And as we were passing by, this was after we had moved to Illinois, but we were back visiting John's parents who were still living at the time and were still living in Little Rock. There was a sign out in front of the gentleman's club. The sign said amateur night. And I just found this profoundly funny. And the name of the club at the time was The Prime Time. Time spelled with a Y because, you know, it's so much classier that way. That was the joke that John and I had. It's like, yeah, you got to spell time with a Y. So I said, who knew this town had so much flesh in it? And I that's the first line of the poem. And I would elbow him a lot and say, you have to write this poem. I can't write it. I've not been in there. You've been in there. He had been in there for a bachelor's party once. Thus the knowing green beer reference in the poem. So this is called Amateur Night at the Prime Time. And again, I want to thank so much the faculty and students for having me visit with you this week. Amateur Night at the Prime Time by John Tribble. Who knew this town had so much flesh in it? The dancer drops her head between her legs, and men who can't afford another drink reach deep to come up with a couple of bucks to get her to remove another shred of pink rip-away t-shirt clinging to her shoulders, like junk mail poking from the lip of a mailbox at an abandoned apartment she left in Malvern or El Dorado. There is only so much one can pay to see, but tonight it's here, where leftover green beer goes for $8 a pitcher, stale popcorn and peanuts, $2.50 a basket. But it's not sustenance they come for unless to feed a lonely imagination or half-forgotten lust, free to anyone who's paid the membership fee at the door. Tomorrow, she might be checking out customers at the Mad Butcher or stocking shelves at 7-Eleven. She could be calling from Sears or flipping burgers at Dairy Queen. Whatever she wakes for to pay the bills and rent, invisible behind a smile or frown, cheerful hello or impersonal grunt. Now she's more spectacle than any daylight life could shadow, the thong of her G-string disappearing before the mirror of blank faces that give back only their reflections, wives and girlfriends and magazines and passing glances staring through the gyrations, shimmering from lubricious skin, jiggling along to the forgettable music. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Allison. What a gift it was to be in your presence this evening and to be inside of your poems this evening. There's no better way to spend a Wednesday evening, in my opinion. Yeah, so we have a few minutes for a Q&A. If anybody has any questions for Allison, you can unmute yourself and ask, or if you would want to post it in the chat, I can try to keep an eye on the chat.
I did mean to mention that the new book that's coming out from Kelsey Books, the new chap book, is called Any Proper Weave. That's the name. And no, it's not suggested by my hair.
Avery, did you have a question?
Yes, I did. Allison, I am just deeply, deeply impressed by how well you are able to work within forms. I enjoy doing it. Sometimes I fail, sometimes I don't, but it's always a work in progress, and right. It's inspiring. But my question for you is, as someone that works so much in forms, when you depart from forms, do you look at particular stanzas like quatrains and tercets and couplets as means to achieve particular rhetorical movements or devices, like a tercet creating a sense of tone, since you're coming from that form mindset?
Oh yeah, Gary James can tell you this because he's had me as a workshop leader, that I am a big fan of even if you're writing free verse, using stanza formations, and that if you're wanting to create something in a poem, and this is just my pure opinion, won't be written down in any book, but I always think tercets are like, they're like the stool. So if you want to throw things a little off kilter, you have 3-line stanzas. If you want to, make everything feel square and right, quatrains. Couplets are so cute, and they're little snuggle bunnies, particularly if you're writing a Shakespearean sonnet and you get to that couplet at the end, and it's like doing this in a poem, the couplet. So I have my opinions about stanza size and stanza shape and line length, even when I'm not writing in any kind of received or fixed form. So yeah, I'm a big fan of, if your poem is going to be a single strophe, like just one strophe, you almost have to be almost perfect with it, because people love the statement you're making with stanzas, that things have to be separated and controlled when you use the page that way. So I think actually the hardest type of poem to write and feel like it's still a poem, I think this is even harder than a prose poem, because usually in a prose poem, the poet takes it upon themselves that if they're going to set up a poem that looks more like prose, that they have to do something within it that distinguishes it as poetry. I think the hardest type of poem is the free verse poem, where you don't use any stanzas, where it's just one long strophe, and for it to feel not like broken prose. I saw a question pop up in chat.
Yep. The poem you wrote about your mom, did you write that in the point of view when you were in college, or looking back years later?
Years later. I think when I was in college, I wouldn't have had the presence of mind to be able to recognize that there were things in my childhood, in my growing up, that weren't right, that there were things that are not discussed, and you don't figure out until you're an adult, whatever that means, that hey, that was wrong. There were things in the relationship between my mother and father that didn't feel right. So yeah, I didn't write about my family unit while I was part of it. When I wrote poems as a kid, it wasn't until I went to college that I was able to write about my parents.
There's another question in the chat from Rachel. How do you feel about sestinas?
Rachel just went through class with me about sestinas. We were talking about sestinas. We were looking at the OG sestina, Elizabeth Bishop's sestina, with the house and the tears and the grandmother in the stove, and how that feels like a little fable, a little story. And we also looked at Cottonfield Sestina, which is by the amazing poet and novelist Honoré Fanon Jeffers. And that poem is a blues poem, even though it's a sestina. And what I said in class is the problem with the sestina is you've got 39 freaking lines where you're repeating these N words. And even if you go online and you go to one of the sestina generators, it's not going to generate a sestina for you. What it's going to do is generate the proper order of the N words, and then you have to do the rest of the work. And the big problem for me with the sestina is once I get the first 24 lines done, it's like, do I really have to deal with these words more? Do I have to do more? It should be a 24-line form. There aren't, as far as I know, many 24-line forms. 24 it's a really nice, long, fixed form poem length. But you get to that beginning of that fifth stanza, and either you're going to give up or you're going to forge ahead. The best sestinas make it look effortless, and you don't get hung up on those 6 repeating N words. And I don't think I've yet written I've written some sestinas, but I don't think I've written one that I would just shout from the rooftops the way I shout those two. So yeah, and then I told my class, okay, next week I want to see your sisters. It's a long ass poem, you know, for those who are used to, if you're a formalist poet or have a formalist bent, you're used to 14 lines and you're done with a sonnet. So it's a war.
Are there any other questions? We still have about 5 minutes. Yeah, Peter.
Hi, Peter.
Hey, Allison, how are you? It's lovely to
I'm
see you.
good.
So nice to see you and so nice to hear your lovely work. So I have a very easy question for you that's a little bit of a two-parter. And
Okay.
apart from the obvious qualities that we know distinguish poetry from prose, like rhyme and stanzas and the way it looks and all that stuff, what are the unobvious qualities? And in a prose poem, for instance, where you doesn't look different, it looks like prose, it doesn't have any rhymes. Okay, so what are the qualities that lift it into the poetic realm then?
I thought you said this was an easy question.
I was being facetious.
Oh my goodness, what makes that line between poetry and prose? The older I get, the more porous that line gets, and the more interested I am in, and this is funny from someone who talks about writing things that are very formal and set within parameters. But as a reader of poetry, I'm interested in things that bring in elements from prose, poems that look like articles, documentary poetry. I'm interested in those things, not necessarily as something that I'm going to write per se, but something I want to read, something that brings in the outside world. Sometimes poems can be so hermetically sealed, and that we get so caught up in the perfect poem or the poem that executes everything exactly. And as I get older, I like things to get a little messier, to look stranger, to incorporate other things outside that are seemingly outside, bringing in musical performance, bringing in stage presence. I'm interested in verse drama, for example, like how can we put poetry on the stage? So I don't know if that answers your, yeah. A book like Obit is really, really interesting. Victoria Chang's book, Obit, if you haven't seen that book. The poems in it are in the form of obituaries. So that's an interesting example to me. So I don't know what makes poetry. I'm willing to call people who aren't poets, like Toni Morrison is a poet. I don't care if she wrote really long books that are called novels. She's a poet to me. You know? So I'm willing to blur those lines a lot more than I used to. You know, you're over here, prose writers. Generally, prose writers are people who are making more money than I am from their actual writing.
We have another question in the chat. Ms. Allison, I deeply enjoyed listening to your poem about your love for earbuds. I love how you specifically address them as a way to make the world go away. My question is, do you tie in the specific length of the poem, how many lines, pages, etc., with the message it contains?
That is a very interesting question. Basically, like, does the shape of the poem imitate what you want it to say? And that poem, the Ode to Earplugs, I was thinking the thought behind it was a poem not necessarily in conversation or imitation of Neruda, who we've studied in my other class. My other class this semester is a international poet seminar. Turns out Neruda was a really terrible person. Wrote lovely poems, terrible person. But anyway, he wrote these things called elemental odes. And if you get the collection that's elemental odes, it's like this big. It's like this big, thick phone book sized book of poems. And, you know, ode to a chair, ode to a lamp, ode to a sock, ode to some fish, like ode to anything. And I was thinking, you know, what has really made my life better and allowed me to be a better person? It's like earplugs. When you put those in, and my husband had sleep apnea, so he snored loudly. Anyone who has sleep apnea who isn't hooked up to a CPAP machine, you're going to hear it. So, you know, we used to joke the most effective birth control for us as a couple is his CPAP machine. But you don't necessarily have to imitate on the page what the poem is about, but it is an interesting experiment. I didn't try to make that poem look like earplugs. It looks like an ordinary poem, but I could have.
We have about 2 minutes left. So if there's maybe one last question before we bring our evening to a close, we have time for that. And if there's not, we can also bring our evening to a close.
We can. Thank you so much for having me visit with you. I'm hoping that this, whatever this is we are confronted with, is soon gone, and I can visit with the good folks there in Milledgeville in person.
Indeed.
Carrie can teach me tennis, and Carrie can teach me barbecue.
We'll show you a good time, Allison. We hope you come. I really do. Please
Yeah.
come.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, all of you, for coming this evening in support of poetry and support of the creative writing program. Thank you again to Allison for really the gift of your poems, as well as to Natalie and Avery, your wonderful readings as well. This was just such a marvelous hour and a half. So thank you for coming to our virtual space, and have a good rest of the night.